Warning: some of the content in this video that will be referenced and discussed is highly disturbing and includes violent elements. Please proceed with caution.
Good evening, dear viewer, and welcome. Today I have a rather alarming story to tell, and it concerns a house. A house that is so dark and so evil, run by such a corrupt man, that not even the destitutes of society dare darken its doorway. Now, you might be thinking I'm jesting, and no such place could ever exist. The unfortunate reality is that it does, and still does to this day. And that place is McKamey Manor. In this section of the video, I will be providing a comprehensive timeline of the rise and fall of McKamey Manor, as well as throwing in additional interesting information that I have found along the way. I do hope you enjoy. So, like any good story, where do we begin? And to which I say we begin in an even darker time, a time that is truly cursed. 2010. McKamey Manor originally opens up in 2010 in a neighbourhood in San Diego. Russ McKamey opens it up as an attraction for the local neighbourhood. You know, something fun for Halloween, something to get the kids healthily scared. Nothing too extreme, just something fun and jovial. And it receives excellent reviews. People do enjoy it, and people are flocking from neighbourhoods far and wide to enjoy this haunted attraction. After all, it's just a bit of fun. However, as the years go by, Russ begins to notice there is a decline in interest, which he doesn't really want. He's having fun with this. It is around 2013 at which we see a genuine change in Russ and his behaviour towards the manor. He decides he wants to try and make it a little bit more scary. And you might ask, how much more scary? Well, take a look for yourself.
I can't breathe! Leave that person out of here now! Listen to me!
It was very clear around this time that something about the manor had changed, but no one could quite put their finger on what exactly it was. It has also been confirmed in an interview with Carol, who is Russ's ex-partner, that she was the one who was solely responsible for keeping the attraction financially afloat. However, it has been alleged but not confirmed nor denied that Russ did use Carol in order to get through certain legal loopholes in order to keep the manor afloat. After all, they were touching people and doing all kinds of nonsense. Do you honestly think that the law would allow such a thing? It was also around this time that the manor managed to achieve some kind of formal recognition from people in the horror community. Russ was invited to various conventions and asked to speak on how exactly does one make an attraction scary, and at this point McKamey Manor was extremely reputable. People were impressed. It seemed like a brilliant idea. However, this time also marks the very obvious climb when McKamey Manor began to get a little bit too intense. Russ McKamey managed to uphold the idea that McKamey Manor is purely for entertainment purposes. All we want to do is give people a good scare. In 2016, McKamey Manor opens a reiteration of the manor known as The Chamber, with the intention of it being an attraction that will scare you like no other place has scared you before, intending to be the most extreme scare possible. But how extreme was extreme? Now, it is usually around the chamber era of McKamey Manor that people most know it for, the kind of hyper-extreme horror haunt that it is. And this is where most people have recalled accounts of having breakdowns on the tour, crying on the tour, throwing up, being forced to eat their own hair, being buried alive. I could honestly go on from the accounts that I have read. Additionally, this marks the time when the manor actually introduces a safe word. Now, previously there had been no safe word, and that is where a lot of the people's safety was heavily put into question. If you claim to be an extreme haunt, then surely there's a way out. After all, it's just an attraction and purely for entertainment purposes. Right? However, a common complaint that I found in research from people was that they did use the safe word multiple times, and still, Russ did not stop the torture. In fact, he carried on for a good 5 or 10 minutes. And surely that's not how a safe word works. The second it's used, the second it stops. And it's almost as if Russ didn't stop. So then it begs the question, why carry on like this? Why do this? 2016 also marks when the reputation of the manor began to drastically drop. People were afraid to go here because they didn't know how bad and how damning the experience would be. This is when we start to hear a lot of the stranger facts about the manor, some of which include that Russ accepts no form of payment from this, but all he asks for is a bag of dog food that he usually gives to either his own dogs or he gives to a shelter, which I suppose the sentiment is nice. However, I wouldn't necessarily say that's wise. How on earth are you keeping the business open if you're not accepting any monetary payment? Like, how does that make any sense? It is also around this time that Russ begins to introduce a certain set criteria that you must pass in order to enter the manor. Let's have a look and see what it says. Be 21 years of age or older, or have a parent's consent if you are between the ages of 18 to 20. Pass a background check which is conducted by McKamey Manor. Complete a sports physical and provide a doctor's note stating that you are physically and mentally well. Be screened via a Facebook live stream or a phone call. Provide proof of medical insurance. Sign a waiver. And pass a portable drugs test on the day of your tour. Now, one of the things that I did find most amusing in my research was that there was this discussion of a 40-page waiver which allowed all kinds of nonsense to occur, which included having your hand impaled on a needle or going to the point of which saying a panic attack does not qualify as a reason to end the tour. It was complete and utter nonsense. And what I concluded from watching a number of interviews with people that did survive the manor is that the 40-page waiver doesn't exist. Yes, it's real and it's out there. You can find it on Reddit quite easily, but it's not the actual waiver. And I don't think any lawyer in the country would ever allow something like that to even be passed. But then again, I could be wrong. It is also important to note that when Russ conducts his interview either on the phone or on Facebook, he does so with the intention of finding out what exactly are your worst fears. What is it that truly makes you afraid? And he does this to almost customize the tour to you. The sentiment is sweet, but the intention is quite the opposite. It is also important to note that at this time, each session or each tour is filmed and uploaded to the McKamey Manor YouTube channel. Now, I have had a look, and since then it has not been, kept quite up to date. I believe that there has been a decline in quality in the tours. However, the evidence is there, and some of the tours are very, very difficult to watch. Russ has argued that he films these tours for the sake of safety and to prove that the person makes it through, which begs an even bigger question. Well, of course they should make it through. This should be safe. Why on earth are you even suggesting that? What are you even trying to do here? Many people have drawn parallels to footage of the tours to torture porn, where you have people who are crying for their lives, throwing up in complete hysterics, nearly having mental breakdowns for the sake of entertainment. Almost seemingly out of nowhere, in September of 2017, Russ was forced to move from San Diego to Tennessee. Now, there has been a little bit of speculation as to why this was done. Some people do reckon that it is because the manor got so many complaints that the people damn near chased him out of town. But another interesting theory that I found out was that Russ owed the state of California nearly $250,000 in taxes. However, later in 2017, the manor did reopen again, and this was announced via their Facebook page. Unfortunately, I do not have the appropriate screenshots because I do not have access to the Facebook page, but it was definitely opened later up in 2017 with a brand new incentive of a cash prize of $20,000 for anyone who was able to complete an 8-hour tour of the manor. To this day, the longest tour has been 6 hours, which is in itself immensely impressive, but why on earth would someone want to stick out 8 hours worth of torture? Between the years 2016 and 2019, people begin to come forward and talk about their experiences in the manor. What exactly was their tour like? One of the key cases, in my opinion, that indicates that this place should be shut down is the case of Laurie Brotherton. Now, Laurie has been interviewed by other people. I will leave a link down below in the description should you want to go and watch it. However, I do warn you, dear viewer, that it is a very disturbing interview, and Laurie does go into an immense amount of detail of what her ordeal was like. I will give you the short version, however. It is clear from the beginning of her tour that Laurie felt as though Russ didn't like her. It was over something that she said, and she felt it was true in the way that he treated her. She argued that he tossed her around a bit more, manhandled her a bit more, was much more rough towards her, much more verbally aggressive. and it was a point at which she was buried alive with only a straw in her mouth as a means to get oxygen that she truly feared for her life. After her tour, Laurie had to go to the hospital because she was so physically distraught from what happened to her. Her face was beaten beyond recognition. She had scratches and bruises all over her body. She was in the hospital for quite a few days in order to recover. Some people have even brought into question the intention of the actors in McKamey Manor, which is a very fair complaint because why exactly would you want to work for this type of establishment and not even get paid? Some people do question whether or not if these people are genuinely dangerous individuals. Some stories even talk about actors who were slapping them awake after they had passed out in order to make sure that they were still good. It's disturbing to say the least. From 2017 till this current day, people have come forward sharing their stories about their experiences with McKamey Manor, the trauma it has caused them, and the pain that it has left them with. Other YouTubers have also made a myriad of videos talking about the intentions, the psychology, as well as why on earth did this place down there exist? And one key question that a lot of people do ask is how does the manor manage to remain open? After all, it has caused quite the sensation over the internet, and you would think by now, with the staggering amount of evidence that is stacked against Russ, that this place would be shut down. It has been speculated but has not been proven that Russ does stream his tours onto the dark web. However, I believe this to be quite a facetious rumour, and I could not find any evidence to support this claim. Some people do reckon that Russ is also committing some form of tax fraud, once again in Tennessee, but he has a previously poor record considering that he still owes the state of California nearly $250,000 in taxes. One thing that I did find quite amusing is that a YouTuber by the name of D'Angelo Wallace actually has done a video on McKamey Manor in which he talks about the Facebook group there. It has been revealed that you need to be part of the Facebook group in order to have access to McKamey Manor now. And in order to have access to the manor, you need to complete something known as a star challenge. So what exactly is a star challenge? One of the examples that D'Angelo gave was that the person who wanted to enter the manor had to be blindfolded and asked questions. For every incorrect answer that they got, they were squirted in the face with water. Now you might be asking why, and D'Angelo came to the conclusion that it was a form of humiliation. D'Angelo also outlined something rather interesting, which is that Russ has intense paranoia for who is in the Facebook group. He believes that there are moles in the Facebook group who will go back and report to people, which I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but it very much could happen. And he actually ejects quite a lot of members, but also adds members again. So it's a very weird paranoid cycle that Russ seems to be partaking in. It could be the fact that people are starting to catch on to his games and pretty much don't want anything more to do with him. It could be that he's trying to protect his only true profitable interest, but then how does he make his money? Or it could just be all about pride. There are two gripes I have with McKamey Manor. The first one, can you actually win it? Personally, I don't think you can. I think it's damn near impossible for you to make 8 hours worth of torture to the extent that they do in order to win $20,000. It sounds ludicrous, and I think that is probably the worst torture of all, the fact that the prize is seemingly non-existent. And the second problem I have with the manor is also another simple one. Where's the haunting? Where's the haunting of this manor? There is no haunting of this manor. This isn't a haunt. We've established this now. There's no ghosties, there's no nothing. What I actually mean is, without being a little bit too hyperbolic, is that with a haunt, there's an illusion of fear, but it is simply that, an illusion. There's no actual torture. There is no vampire in the corner waiting to suck your blood. There is no ghost. There is no werewolf. It's just pretend. And arguably, McKamey Manor crosses that border, that boundary, into something that is a bit too real. Something that is irreversible once the damage has been done. And I suppose that is the biggest problem that people have with McKamey Manor. The fact that Russ doesn't know when to stop, and he doesn't know where his limits are anymore. And here we are, the year is 2020, McKamey Manor is still very much open and still very much has a horrible, horrible reputation. I will now conclude my section. I believe I have provided you with more than enough context as to why the manor is a complete and utter hellhole, and that I hope that my fellow companions, Cringe Monster Productions and SoPsyched, can provide you insight into the psychology behind the manor and what exactly it does to the people that visit. Thank you very much for your time.
I have delved into some aspects that will be mentioned in certain parts of this segment in my Psychology of Horror and Psychology of Avatar use videos, so if you'd like to hear about some of those concepts mentioned in further detail, I'll link the videos below. First, let's talk about the fight or flight response. It is the autonomical response within the body when a threatening stimuli is presented. Seeing or hearing a threat will send signals in the brain, starting at the amygdala and then to the hypothalamus. The pituitary gland, located below the hypothalamus, will then secrete adrenocorticotropic hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, which in turn causes a physical response to fear. These signs can include, but are not limited to, pupil dilation, an increase of heart rate, and sweating. This is the fight or flight response. For many of the KM haunts, the fight or flight response is provoked right from the get-go. This was clear in the first video I watched of Christina. It was extremely rough with grabbing, hitting and dragging. It is highly intense and a method of setting the scene by instilling what can only be described as intense fear. Many threatening stimuli are entirely based and related to our senses, if not all. Fears we have are based on threats to survival, due to evolutionary instincts. Surprise, surprise. We rely on our senses to gauge how safe we are in certain situations. The first sense that is somewhat exploited within KM is sight. Scotomophobia is the word for a general fear of our eyesight being obscured, developing blind spots, or going completely blind. It is quite a common phobia, and as mentioned before, it derives from a need to survive. We have to be able to see threats and the expression of an attacker and where the eyes of the attacker are in order to predict their moves. KM uses masks, blindfolds, a lack of lighting, or even complete darkness to facilitate the phobia triggering. The second sense is hearing. Participants are often given audio through headphones that has reported to play strange and/or loud noises, as well as disturbing or degrading messages. We will focus on the messages later, but the loud noises have an instantaneous behavioural reaction that is universal, an attempt to remove the source of the sound or to cover one's ears. This is instinctual to protect the inner ear, the cochlea, as exposure to extremely loud audio can cause hearing loss or deafness. The fear of these is known as phonophobia. When you're unable to see a threat as your vision is obscured by an obstacle or the dark, or if the threat is behind you, hearing is more often than not solely depended on, thus the phobia exists. Even taste and smell is used in KM. During the Mother's Dinner section, participants are made to eat and/or drink foul-tasting and smelling food. And drink, if it can be even called that. Guess why we have an aversion to these? Evolution! Particularly bitter and sour tastes are related to detecting poisonous substances. This is why we gag or spit out certain foods. It is a natural disgust response. These foods and the reactions aren't just necessarily scary in themselves, they just induce disgust and an avoidance reaction. However, there are phobias related to disgust that are featured heavily in KM. The fear of blood, or the sight of blood, hemophobia, is theorized to derive from a survival instinct that seeing blood indicates that a person has been attacked, and that a fainting response is playing dead. It is also suspected to be linked to direct or indirect childhood trauma, and studies such as Kendler et al. 1992 concluded that this particular phobia, as well as agoraphobia, social phobia, and other specific phobias, have a genetic link. After examining data from monozygotic, identical, and dizygotic, non-identical twins. Interestingly enough, the exploitation of snake and spider phobias, ophiophobia, and arachnophobia, respectively, derives from the same evolutionary precaution to avoid poisoning by avoiding potentially poisonous animals. It's why we might not be so terrified of dogs unless we've been bitten by a dog before, but we are terrified of snakes and spiders. The fear of animals such as dogs often comes from a past experience of being bitten by a dog, and so we have learnt that phobia, whereas the phobia of spiders and snakes is evolutionarily encoded. Also, in case there are any ophiophobics and arachnophobics in the audience, I've used cute images of them, baby snake and cute animated spider, so I hope that doesn't bother you too much. Then there are tactics that aren't related to fears at all, or at least common ones. What I'm about to discuss are aspects of KM I believe are fully, or at least mostly, implemented solely for the enjoyment of the team behind the event. There are many references in the statements within the videos to a group of people in Los Angeles who view the experience live and pay for certain actions to be performed during the haunt. Many have speculated that these viewers are on, or at least tied to, the dark web, and that KM is a cover for a red room. Others have suggested that the people in LA line is merely a ruse to create a sense of insecurity for the participants, as they believe their fate is in someone else's hands who is a paying customer. Either way, I can't confirm or deny the existence of the live stream viewers, and it is alleged. I can only say that at the very least these following aspects appear to be for the benefit of the team present. Humiliation and dominance are a key part of KM. This can range from forcing participants to crawl on the ground to making them imitate animal sounds. This is a form of humiliation via dehumanization, to make them see themselves as lesser than. Many have even been forced to shave their hair and have it shoved into their mouth and forced to attempt to eat it. I'm sure as phobias are vast and highly specific, somebody out there could have a very specific phobia of having their head shaved and possibly even being made to eat hair, but it's not a common phobia. The possibility of losing your hair or having your head shaved forcibly doesn't plague the majority of people on the daily. A loss of hair can be cause for distress for people who have conditions like alopecia or trichotillomania, or people who have chemotherapy, but for most of us who don't have those conditions or who aren't going through those treatments, the thought doesn't really arise for us. Therefore, aside from humiliation, it has no real place in a haunt. Even if there are people out there with very specific phobias of someone coming into their room and shaving their hair and making them eat it, how many people actually have that versus how many people experience that in KM? While watching specific videos, I noticed that while men were also targeted for head shaving, Russ can be particularly interested in shaving women's heads. This is a form of humiliation known as defeminization, and I will link a prior video I made on defeminization, but essentially it serves to strip away a woman's identity and is often used to punish them. It can cause distress and anxiety, but not necessarily specifically fear. Russ and the actors also insist upon participants calling them Sir. This relates to dominance, control, and power. While taking away a person's autonomy can result in terror, it again is not a regular day-to-day fear. By being pushed into a van, blindfolded, tied up, and either having people pay for what they want to happen to you, or being told that people are doing so, creates a situation where a person's free will and the team becomes dominant. While the idea of being kidnapped, tied up, blindfolded, and being ordered around is definitely scary, it again is not a personal fear. A lot of these experiences are meant to be personalised. I understand, starting it that way will cause fear in anyone, but I can't see how many people would view being forced to become subservient would be an average fear. Like you're just walking to the shop and somebody kidnaps you. Yeah, the world is a horrible place, and there are some countries where that's definitely a possibility. There are dark things happening out there. But in sunny old England, I'm not worried if I'm going to go to Sainsbury's and get picked up in a van on the way there. Verbal assault is also used against the participants that does not enhance their horror experience. On one hand, Russ will be warning the participants that it's a mistake and telling them not to sign the waiver, while on the other hand, at the exact same time, the actors are telling them to hurry up and sign it so they don't become losers or quitters. This is possibly repeated in audio of the headphones that create doubt and is directly paralleled with Russ telling participants that they don't really want to quit, they don't want to be weak or losers or quitters, and intensifies the stress and confusion experienced. This could be coupled with physical assault, such as Christina's video. While she's being forced to sign this waiver in a way with the confusing and conflicting messages she's getting, she's also being hit and pulled and slapped. And in many ways, the waiver is signed under duress. And Russ telling the participants that they don't really want to quit throughout the experience is a form of gaslighting. He's been known to ignore safe words. He's been known to just not let people go. Instead, he'll tell them, no, you don't want to be a quitter, you don't want to be a loser, and just confuses them even more. They're taken in straight away, they are physically assaulted, verbally assaulted, given conflicting messages, and then gaslighted throughout the entire experience.
Hello there, I'm Alex and I'm so psyched to be here with Charlie and ItsFringey. Thank you very much for having me on and wanting to hear my psychological expertise on this. So let's jump into this. Let's start off with defining what even is torture, because we are talking about a torture house and not a haunted house experience here. Widely accepted is a definition of torture that is provided by the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment, and they refer to torture as severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, that is inflicted on a person for whatever purpose. It shows that ill treatment during captivity, such as psychological manipulations, humiliating treatments, like Charlie said, with, wanting to be called sir, with defeminization techniques, with dehumanization in general, and other forced stressed positions, for example, having to hold a certain pose that is very uncomfortable, is not different from physical torture in terms of severity of mental suffering that they can cause and actually do cause. In fact, studies, and studies will be linked down below in the description box, I'm referring to all the psychological studies ever since the 90s up to about 2016 to 2018. The latest, those are the ones that I'm referring to throughout my segment here. Studies have found that it has the same underlying mechanisms of traumatic stress, as well as when it comes to the long-term psychological outcome, they do show the same symptoms. But now the question is, does everyone really suffer the same consequences? Well, no. In a clinical context, it is the interpretation of the survivor, of the person who survived whatever kind of torture it is, that really matters. And for that, current circumstances can be as important as trauma history, just in order to understand what kind of reaction the torture survivor will exhibit. Now, torture targets the person as a whole, physically, emotionally, and socially. So that PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is pretty much an inadequate description of the whole magnitude and of the complexity of the effects and aftermath of torture. When we diagnose PTSD for torture survivors, some people who have very severe symptoms that are related to trauma may not even reach all the criteria for the diagnosis. So in psychology, we have currently the DSM-5 for diagnosing psychological disorders, and we have a category that is complex trauma, and it has been proposed that this disorder or this categorization may be closer to the criteria that torture targets or torture survivors exhibit. Now, other than post-traumatic stress symptoms, torture survivors and those who survived the McKamey Manor can rightfully be described as torture survivors, have also elevated risks of anxiety, of depression, and adjustment problems. And those adjustment problems are also shown in other studies that are very often include outbreaks of anger and even physical violence that is mostly directed towards those who are very close to them, to the ones suffering from those symptoms. So it's either family members or very close friends or partner or even sometimes kids. But the symptoms should always be understood in the context that we presented them in, that this is some form of complex trauma that has happened and now we are dealing with the aftermath. And we know that there is no diagnostic terminology that will really encapsulate the deep distrust of others that many survivors have, developed, or the destruction of all that gave their lives meaning, that made things seem understandable and reliable, because this trust was taken from them and ripped away, and they experienced betrayal on the deepest level. Also, they experienced guilt and shame about the humiliation during the torture, which we know that he used those techniques, and also about, the survivor's inability to withstand it. Many people broke down, many people cried, many people begged, and it does guilt them later on, and it does shame them, even though from the outside perspective we all of course wouldn't perceive it like that. But for the torture victims and survivors, it is a very real feeling. So how do we treat people with those symptoms? Well, we have two really well established alternatives. One is narrative exposure therapy, and the other one is cognitive behavioral therapy. And they seem equally effective in reducing trauma symptoms and, though to a much lesser extent, even depression. Now, talking about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT, what is that? Well, to break it down into really simple terms, it is built on exposure. And the exposure is the practice of systematic attention to feared and avoided cues related to the trauma. So you have a list of different things that will spike your fear or your avoidance, and it will be categorized with your psychologist, with your psychotherapist, and put in order of how intense the fear is, and systematically through exposure and seeing that there are no repercussions to it, that there is nothing to be fearful of, so to say, they have the aim of extinguishing the learned association between those cues and the response. So yes, it is Pavlov's dog all over again. Just, starting at the back and working our way to the front of the learned behavior. So this process is simpler when there is just a single rather than multiple events that we can focus on, even though in a single event fear may be generated by multiple cues in several modalities, as Charlie mentioned before, with visual, auditory, olfactory, tactile, and proprioceptive modes. So in conclusion, what does that mean in regards to this torture manner? Let's not. I could go on, but I hope I made my point clear. From a psychologist's point of view, seeing as the US has only signed off on 5 of the 18 human rights treaties, again, linked down in the description box, this is the lowest number worldwide of signed treaties for any developed country, and is only undermatched by Bhutan, Niue, Palau, Tonga, and Tuvalu. That's it. So it's easier to overlook people like McKamey who get away with torture and get to label it a haunted house experience. It shows how important it is to have this debate and prevent others following in his steps.
I would like to thank ItsFringey for doing her segment on the history of McKamey Manor. Her channel and socials will be linked down below. I would also like to thank Alex, also known as SoPsyched, for her segment of the video, which goes over what the victims of McKamey Manor might be going through. Again, her channel and socials will also be linked in the description. And I'd like to thank all of you for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please subscribe and hit the bell button, because YouTube doesn't want you to know when I upload, even if you are subscribed. As well as this, my Twitter, Steam, Etsy store, Patreon, and PayPal are all linked in the description. Please, if you want to join my Patreon, you will get cool perks like being able to join my Discord or having private Patreon streams just for $1 a month. Thank you guys, and let's not go down to the manor today.